Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 15 Draft Recap and Breakdown. As always, I'm your host, IllLogic. I'm the coach of the Buffalo Boufflant, and I am joined by my co-hosts, SteveChuck, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Hey, everybody.
And Michael, coach of the Route 1 Burbs.
What's up, everyone?
Steve, this was a long draft, but also kind of a short time in between drafts here to get ready for this. We start to get on a more consistent drafting schedule. But I really want you to talk to us about what this season is going to be bringing to us. We know it looks like we're going back to a standard draft, but what are some of the more fine details that our folks need to know as context here as we get into the Season 15 draft?
Yep, as you mentioned, going back to a standard singles draft for this season. A usual budgeted draft. We have 16 tiers ranging from 0 to 15, 90 total points. So on average, each mon selected will be above the average 7.5 tier, but the budgets did feel a little tight by the end, especially with many coaches getting a lot of high tiers early on. We are also going with Terra captains. This is something our league hasn't done yet, so we're excited to see how it goes. All of the mons are eligible to be Terra captains. There are points for Terra captains that are a little usually in line with the tiers. However, they can be a little bit more if a mon particularly well abuses the Terra mechanic. Each coach can elect up to 3 Terra captains that total up to 20 Terra points, and those are the mons that are able to terrestrialize. It is going to be open Terra into matches, but the Terra captains are able to Terra into any type. It is just revealed at the start of battle. That's the general idea. Good to get back into singles. Good to try out the Terra mechanics. I know there are, a couple of weird things about, certain bans or not bans and things like that. But overall, no one was happy with the end result. So it was a great compromise and what we're moving forward with.
Absolutely. And if you need any clarification, there should be some rules down in the description as well. Michael, we were kind of the two main culprits here for tiering. Steve pointed out that 90 points is supposed to be above average, but boy, it sure did not feel like enough by the end. We went through the drafting process. What are some of your thoughts being a little behind the scenes in part of the tiering discussion and rules discussion and such, as well as being a drafter in the league? What's your overall impression of what the season is going to be like?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that, kind of influence how we all felt about the draft was this was one of our drafts with more tiers. We had 16 total tiers this season, which sometimes we have, in the 10 to 15 range. Sometimes we drop it down to kind of the 5 to 10 range, depending on the season. But as, more mons have been added, smaller numbers of tiers feel like they don't quite reflect the value of all the mons in the tiers at that point. So we went with more tiers. And then also, this is a pretty big season. I think we have 18 coaches, which is definitely on the higher end of our seasons. So I think the spread out tiers, kind of meaning that there's less kind of variance in the value of the Pokemon in those tiers, combined with just so many coaches drafting, I think that definitely leads to kind of where a lot of us during the draft felt like there weren't a whole lot of, steals for amounts of points. Everything I think was pretty fairly tiered this time. And we'll see, how we kind of feel about it going forward, whether we want to drop it down, have it be a little bit more of a competition for, a little bit more, kind of value picks rather than having everything kind of so strictly lined out, or, if we keep liking just kind of being pretty spot on with our thoughts, we thought. And then, again, we adjusted some things for Terra, but I think Terra is definitely going to be a big thing this season. We have a lot of those top tier mons that are often Terra banned in other draft leagues are legal to be Terra captains. They just eat up the vast majority of your Terra budget. So I think the balance between, the people who have some of those insanely good Terra mons and then people who have, kind of try some of the lower tier Terra abusers, we'll see how all that works out. And I think it's going to be really interesting.
As you said, a ton of different draft strategies here that I'm very excited to get into. 18 coaches, as Michael mentioned, was a ton. A lot of weight for those wheel picks to get between their wheels. But we really do have to get moving on this. 18 coaches to get through. Let's head off to number 1. And with the first overall pick, shout out to the Calgary Corviknight with their new logo. Looking real nice there. Their first overall pick is, of course, to no one's surprise, Dragapult, followed by Ursaluna Bloodmoon, Glamora, Florges, Orthworm, Bramblegast, Iron Jugulus, Tauros, Paldea, Blazeform, Barraskewda, Morgrem, and Dedenne, with the Terra captains being that Glamora, Tauros, and Dedenne. We're going to go around the horn here. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
So, going through the speed tiering here, there's a little bit of a gap between Barraskewda's 136 and Iron Jugulus's 108, but otherwise a very solid speed tiering all the way from 52 at the bottom up to Dragapult's 142. In terms of overall stats compared to other coaches, they are bottom 3 in terms of their special defense, while being top 3 in terms of their speed. Special defense is really carried by Florges, outstanding there, but a lot of other mons are more glass cannons on that special side. Taking a quick look at the typing, they have a couple types that are a little bit of an issue. Fairy with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists, and Ice with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists. A little bit more worried about Ice with a lot of the resists coming from later draft picks, while the mons they will bring more often are more weak to it. Michael, what are you thinking about the team?
Yeah, so I think where this team really shines is in its hazard play. We have Glamora and Orthworm both having access to spikes and stealth rocks. Glamora, of course, with the toxic debris, also getting up the toxic spikes, and then maybe spikes from Bramblegast sometime, as well as then in removal, Glamora having Mortal Spin and Bramblegast having Rapid Spin gives them really solid removal and just great overall hazard play. We'll see later on kind of people struggled with that, and they are not struggling with that at all. I think another benefit of the team is lots of their nice fast offensive pivots, and they're like Barraskewda, Dedenne, Dragapult, Iron Jugulus has U-turn, which would help get them out of those somewhat frail offensive pieces maybe into some of their more reliable defensive pieces. And then, on the offensive side, things like setup on like Dragapult, Iron Jugulus, Tauros, I think gives them some nice ability to potentially break through and sweep games. So pretty solid here. No offensive Terramons really, though, looking. Nate, what do you think about that?
Yeah, Glamora is a great Terra captain. Just a little disappointed not to see the Dragapult showing off that potential Terra hat. But Glamora, obviously awesome to get out of that typing, get a little more coverage potentially there too. Tauros, not traditional, but as you mentioned, could potentially set up and could potentially offer a little something there to Denny, a nice little throw-in piece. We'll see what he can make work with that. I think really game plan of the team, I think you nailed it there. There's a lot of really good momentum to try and switch pieces around here, get into some of the bulkier pieces when needed, set up the hazards, and then allow some of the faster threats to break, things like the Dragapult, maybe get off a nice meteor beam or set up a little bit with Ursaluna. My concern, maybe that's a little bit special offensive heavy compared to physical offensive heavy. Maybe Dragapult with the Terra hat would help a little bit, but that's really just kind of nitpicking a little bit. The Calgary Corviknight, very successful in the regular season, still looking for that big playoff win. Let's move on to coach number 2. And with the number 2 pick, it's the Corviknight Clobberers going back to clobber those number 1 Corviknight. Starting off with the Great Tusk in the number 2 pick, followed by a new High Riser and OU Primarina, Ogerpon Wellspring, Zapdos, Metagross, Overquill, Altaria, Salazzle, Illumise, Dugtrio Lola, and the Nachi stack, with the Terra captains being Ogerpon, Altaria, and Knackle stack. Steve, tell us about the stats and typings.
So, quick looking at the speed tiers, there is a little bit of a gap between Primarina's 60 and Knackle-Stack's 35, although that really isn't an issue at those especially low spears. So overall, great tiering all the way through their range from 35 up to 117 at the high end. High end is a little bit lower than we would like, but generally okay. Comparing their stats to other teams, their stats are generally average. They don't have anything in the top or bottom 3 for any stats, so overall looking reasonably balanced across all their stats. Taking a quick look at the typing, they do have a couple of types that their weaknesses really stand out, with ground, rock, and water all having 4 or more weaknesses. They all, though, have a similar number, just 1 less resist. So all those types can be a little bit of a problem in the right situation, but with the number of resist to cover for it, should be okay. Michael, what are the move pools looking like?
Yeah, so actually going from, one great hazard team to another hazard team, their hazard setting is insane. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Pokemon with access to some sort of hazard. Of course, not all of them are going to be equally good, but with stuff like the Metagross, the Nachi stack, Overquill, they've got great setting. As well as pretty solid removal. Great Tusk, one of, if not the best removers in the game, as well as that Terra Altaria with Defog, potentially as a backup if you want to go more straight like a banded Great Tusk or something, is pretty nice. Their pivoting is okay. They've got a couple U-turn, flip turn mons. Nothing crazy, but it's nice to have something. as well as pretty decent status options, but not the most kind of not the widest breadth on any of their Pokemon in particular. Most Mons only getting one, maybe two. Then for boosting options, they also are a little lacking here. Sure, we have stuff like, Rapid Spin on Great Tusk for a speed boost. Metagross certainly has plenty of options. Ogerpon has that Sword Stance. Primarina has Calm Mind, but nothing that stands out to me as, like, really kind of centralizingly threatening, except for maybe that Ogerpon, but not one of the more offensive forms of Ogerpon. So we'll see how that plays out for them. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Terras here. This is maybe my favorite team in terms of Terras. All three of these are very great abusers. Ogerpon's, of course, getting that big stat boost with the mask, and then also with Terra there on the Spadef for Ogerpon. Awesome to see there. Altaria and Knucklestack are lower tier mons that I think are genuinely pretty well elevated by altering their defensive typing a little bit. Nachistack, do not sleep on this thing. And Salt Carrier, you're going to have to bring Covert Cloak just to cover for a 2-point mon. Are you crazy? And Altaria actually has quite a bit in its move pool now with the new gen, which is really neat to see. This team looks really solid. It's pretty nicely well-rounded. I say just enough pivoting, just enough offense, just enough bulk all the way around there. I think this is a team that could come together really well. I love where the team is going here. Hopefully there's enough offensive firepower to go on this team and enough setup to be able to take advantage of that. Corviknight Clobbers looking to get back into the playoff hunt after a disappointing season last time. Let's move on to our third coach. And with the number 3 pick, it's our very own Route 1 Burbs here, starting off with the Iron Valiant with the number 3 overall pick, followed by Raging Bolt, Forretress, Amoonguss, Lycanroc Dusk, Delphox, Gastrodon, Moltres Galar, Crocalor, Rotom Frost, and Jumpluff, with the Terra Captains being that Iron Valiant at the top, and the Rotom Frost and Jumpluff at the end. Steve, talk to us about stats and typing.
Yeah, so again, starting with the speed tiering, at the low end, we're again seeing a gap from Raging Bolt 75 down to Crocalor's 49. The tiering at the bottom, not so important, although not having something around 70 to 60 could be a little bit of an issue against opponents trying to get a little more bulk out of those slower pieces. Overall, though, the range of 30 to 116 is definitely good enough. Taking a look at the average stats, the team is bottom 3 in terms of average attack, with only really the Lycanroc Dusk and the Iron Valiant having nice attack stats. So definitely something to look out for the team there. Taking a look at typing, there are a couple types where the weaknesses outnumber. Ground is one that really sticks out with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists, with a lot of the resists coming from 3 of their last 4 picks. Additionally, Rock is pretty bad with 5 weaknesses to 2 resists, although in an opposite way to ground, a lot of those are from the bottom picks having the weakness. Ghost could also be an issue with a single weakness and single resist. Michael, what do the move pool lists look like?
Yeah, so I think a strong point of this part of this team is priority. I don't have the most diverse priority options, but Accelerock and Thunderclap are both very strong options. So I like that. I have okay hazard setting. I mean, I've got the Forretress, I've got the Gastrodon as different hazard setters, and I do only have the Forretress as removal, which is unfortunate, especially because you talked about rocks are pretty annoying for my team, but I at least have something, and I think it's a pretty reliable spinner as well. Not great pivoting on my team. I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses of the team. I thought I was going to try to do better about this season, but that just never really made its way into my focus while I was drafting. I do have fantastic options for status setting, though. Lots of different status from lots of different mons. The Jumpluff, the Amoonguss, of course, having lots of stuff, but as well as stuff like Thunderwave on a couple different mons, Will-O-Wisp on a couple different mons. And then I think I also am pretty good with the setup options. I have a lot of different, particularly scary setup options. I think Delphox is underrated as a nasty plot mon. Iron Valiant, of course, could be Booster Energy, could be Sword Stance, could be Calm Mind. Lycanroc could be Sword Stance. Moltres likes to set up Raging Bolt, can Calm Mind up. I think I'm pretty scary offensively, although I do definitely have some defensive things to work on for the team. I also think I'm pretty good with my different options for Terra Captains, so Nate, why don't you run those by us?
Yeah, the ones that you have currently are pretty solid. Iron Valiant, of course, at the top there can take advantage. You know you want an extra turn to get a Sword Stance or Calm Mind off, or just to get that hit in without getting too low so that you're still not in range of another one. Do not sleep on Rotom forms being Terra Captains. These things are sick. You see the Ice form, nope, no longer has all those weaknesses. Love Rotom as a Terra Captain. and Jump Bluff. I'm so excited to see what you can do with Jump Bluff. But there are other really nice options on tier 2. We'd love to see the Lycanroc get in there. The Crocolore, of course, is a really cool option. Galarian Moltres, you get it into Berserk range more often. Are you kidding me? Delphox, actually really solid too. So you have a lot of ability to play around with the Terra Captains, even if you're just satisfied with the team as is. And as it is, I think it's pretty solid. It just seems a little bit potentially one note. I see for sure the upper right corner. You see the Fortress, Amoonguss, Gastrodon. Yeah, we're going to see a lot of pivoting between there. I just wonder if we have enough offensive firepower and you're able to pivot between the offensive firepower and those defensive tools well enough that Iron Valiant can finish at the end and that Raging Bolt could potentially break through, or if they need a little bit more help. But the pieces, I think, are there. It'll be up to you to be able to maneuver them around properly. Let's move on to the 4th pick. And with 4th overall pick, welcome to the league, the Chicago Clods. And with their first pick in the Wooper Club League, they selected Chi-Yu, 4th overall, followed by the Murkrow and another dark type in King Gambit, followed by Gyarados, Screamtail, Espathra, Clodsire, Ogerpon, Cornerstone, Regice, Dusknoir, and Bastiodon, with the Terra Captains being Espathra, Regice, and Dusknoir. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typing.
So looking at the speed tiers, there is a gap in the middle speeds again from Gyarados' 81 to King Gambit and Regice's 50, as well as a gap from Dusknoir's 45 to Bastiodon's 30, although that bottom one I'm not very worried about, with a total range from 20 up to 111. One concern here is, of course, that high speed at 111 will lead the team outsped by many things, although a speed boost to Spathra will certainly help in covering that to a certain extent. Taking a look at the base stats, they are top 3 in terms of the average defense and special defense, having some very bulky pieces, while being bottom 3 in terms of speed, with, as mentioned, the below average speeds and not really much of a high end. Taking a look at their typing, ground could be a little bit of an issue with 4 weaknesses and just 2 immunities, no resists. Although the immunities are higher of picked mon, so hopefully that will work out very well. Rock also can be pretty bad with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists, with a lot of those weaknesses coming early, so it could be a very key thing for them to try and fight off. Michael, what do you think about the move pool?
Yeah, so not an insane amount of priority here. The Sucker Punch from the King Gambit is scary, of course, though. They've got pretty good hazard setting. The Clodsire, of course, has plenty of hazards itself, as well as Stealth Rock on several other mons. The big thing, though, is they have no form of hazard removal, which is really unfortunate, especially seeing things like that Chi-Yu, Regice, Gyarados, Murkrow, all things that are going to be really pressured into having heavy-duty boots because of no hazard removal. Pivoting is also not great on this team as well, something to look for there. However, they do have an impressive 7 taunt users, so I just thought that was a fun fact. And then their status options are pretty solid and pretty diverse. I think they have a good status game, and of course they've got different options for setup. We've got the Gyarados, the Ogerpon, the King Gambit, Espathra. They've got lots of different scary threats, so I think they're pretty good offensively there, but definitely a little bit lacking in some of the kind of utility options. They do have also 3 Trick Room setters, but no particularly interesting Trick Room mons, so maybe we see them pick up something like that later in the season. What do you think, Nate?
I like the Terra options here. Espathra is real nice. Sad to see King Gambit go without a Terra option, but Espathra is banned from OU for a reason. Give it 1 extra typing to be able to shred things with, and oh boy. Regice is actually pretty interesting mon there too. It's something that's always pretty much just been held back by its typing. Would love to see that go off a little bit. Dusknoir still hanging out. Would love to, I guess, let's get a little more power on something. It could potentially make something work there too. The team, it's a collection of very good mods. I'm not sure how well they work together. There's some really interesting pieces here, though, and it's going to take a lot of smart maneuvering for sure on this one. The lack of pivoting is a little bit of concerning here. The lack of options to be able to go into, and a little bit of sameness from some of the mods here, too. The teams that they're good against, they will be very good against, but I'm a little concerned that these wide breadth of teams they're not that great against could be too much. But hey, they have the Clodsire on the Clods, and it's their first season in draft. I wonder if they can make a little bit of magic happen with that mascot. Speaking of magic, we're going to move on to number 5. And at number 5, well, it's SteveChuck back again to ruin our lives, this time with the Chen Pao picked in the first round, and then the Peturunt in round 2. I'll let him talk about that a little bit. Then Iron Moth, Blastoise, Landorus Eye, Decidueye Hisui, Electros, Frogadier, Berserker, Zorua Hisui, and the Necrozma. With that Necrozma heading up the Terra Captains alongside Decidueye and Frogadier. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings of your team.
Yes, so there is, of course, a little bit of a speed gap between Chien Pao and Iron Moth, 135 to 110. Although, as mentioned, in those higher tiers, it isn't as relevant. An overall range of 50 to 135, giving a reasonable speed tier, although not really flushing out the low speeds. Looking at the stats overall, the team is top 3 in terms of special attack, with everything else looking reasonable. The typing, Dark can be a little bit of an issue with 3 weaknesses and only 2 resists, and those 2 resists not especially being bulky pieces, so that could be an issue looking forward. Dragon also is a little suspect with a single resist, no fairy types here, just the low steel type Berserker carrying that Dragon resist, really playing a key role there. Michael, what does the move pool look like?
Yeah, so I think one thing to note is that you don't have a whole lot of like Tailwind or Trick Room access, but I think you're going to be pretty okay without those. You have decent access to hazards. You've got a lot of different mons that can set them, but they're not on a lot of mons that I think would love to be setting them a lot of the time. Stuff like Rocks on Landorus probably doesn't really want to be taking the time to do that. Necrozma doesn't want to be setting rocks, maybe. So you have hazards, but not fantastic hazard setters. Similarly for removal, you've got Rapid Spin on Blastoise and Defog on Decidueye, which is, good options to have. Not on star Pokemon, but I think it's just good enough with both those options there. You do, however, have insane pivoting. 9 Pokemon with pivot options that aren't Baton Pass. Is just insane to see. So much U-turn on this team. Is really just going to give you insane momentum in all of your games. Nice access to Knock Off and Taunt as well on this team. Not great at spreading status, a little bit limited in kind of your mons. You have only 1 Pokemon that gets Thunder Wave, only 1 Pokemon that gets Will-O-Wisp, 2 Pokemon that get Toxic, but I think really your bread and butter is going to be pivoting between all of those scary things. You've got lots of scary setup options, stuff like Landorus, Chien Pao, Iron Moth, Shell Smash, Blastoise, maybe Necrozma can do everything. I think you've got a really scary team there, especially with all of the momentum you're going to be getting, being able to play a very nice, reserved, confident, and kind of patient game. What do you think here, Nate?
Definitely agree with that. The Terra Captains look real nice here too. Necrozma, of course, a standout for all the things that it can do. Let's give it a little bit better typing to potentially help set up or attack on a different offensive front. Decidueye Hisui really does want to get out of that typing as well, and has a really interesting move pool, both setup-wise and just offensively. And of course, Protean with Terra is something there down at 0, but that's all right there. Definitely agree with the pivoting aspect of the team being very important. This looks like a lot of good mons. They're not quite slapped together. There is a good amount of consistency and synergy here, and it really is tied together by the frequent uses of momentum that I anticipate we'll be seeing throughout Steve's matches here. The incredible bulky pieces. You mentioned a high special attack on the team. Oh, by the way, there's also Chen Pao to complement that on the physical side. This is a really, really nicely put together team. Hopefully the low tiers can keep up a little bit. Shout out to Berserker putting in the work there, of course, as the Dragon Resist. But this looks really solid for you, Steve. I hope to see you in the finals yet again. But we're going to have to move on to the number 6 coach. Yeah, with number 6 picks, it's Sasbo and the Boldors picking Meowscarada up for the 2nd straight season, this time 6th overall, followed by Mew, Volcanion, Arbolifa, Jolteon, Fezandipity, Regirock, Flygon, Grafaiai, Blaziken, and Misdreavus, with Arboliva, Grafaiai, and Blaziken rounding out the Terra Captain. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
Yes, so for the boulders, they do have a gap, once again, in those kind of low speed tiers, Volcanion 70 down to Regirock's 50, but otherwise have solid tiering from a bottom of 39 up to 130, very reasonable there for their speed. Taking a look at their stats, they are top 3 in terms of their special defense and their speed, so really looking fantastic there in terms of their base stats, getting a lot of value there. Their typing, they do have multiple types I would like to talk about. Dragon is a little iffy with a single resist coming from Fezandipity and complemented by 1 weakness. Flying can be a little bit suspect with 3 weaknesses and only 2 resists, some of those weaknesses being the earlier picked mons. Ground is pretty bad with 6 weaknesses to 4 resists. Ice with 3 weaknesses to resist. Psychic with 3 weaknesses to resist. And Rock with a single weakness from a earlier pick and a single resist from a later pick. Lots of resist to make up for them, but some types being a little suspect there. Certainly something coaches could take advantage of to try and break through this team. Michael, what does the move pools look like?
Yeah, I think something to note is that they actually have 3 solid Tailwind setters on this team, which could definitely go a long ways to getting things like that Volcanion, I think maybe even like the Regirock, things that are on the slower side, getting them to do a bit more work. They've got pretty solid access to hazards. Of course, Mew gets all the hazards. Meowscarada gets some hazards, some Stealth Rocks otherwise. Nothing crazy, but pretty good. However, they do have no removal. Absolutely no hazard removal. A little less awkward than the last team we saw with no removal, but the Volcanian certainly would like to not have to run boots all the time. So we'll see, maybe they can pick up some removal somewhere else. They do have some pretty nice pivoting as well as excellent status spreading on this team. Mew gets statuses, Pheasantipity has statuses, Grafai, Misdreavus has Will-O-Wisp and Thunderwave. I think that's pretty nice there on that budget Mon. So they've got a lot of different status options. And then for kind of setup options, nothing crazy. They've got the Dragon Dance on the Flygon, Swords Dance on stuff like Blaziken, Calm Mind on like Jolteon. Nothing crazy, but definitely not lacking in that department either. What do you see here, Nate?
I see Mew setting up as well, and a lot of different Terra candidates here. Arboliva is maybe one of my favorite Terramons. Gives it a whole new aspect and dimension, makes it just about unkillable. Grafai and Blaziken can, of course, find their way too, but really, talking with the coach, the bottom of the draft ended up being a little bit of a mess here, and probably will be reworked a little bit there. I do see still a lot of great candidates, though. Jolteon, Flygon, Volcanion, Misdreavus, actually really nice there too as a budget Terra option, so we'll see about that. Again, the coach is going to have to make a few changes there at the bottom to kind of mix things up. We already mentioned quite a few of the weaknesses. We'll see if maybe they can pick up something budget, or maybe go for one of those high tier options that never ended up getting picked there. But the top of the draft does give me hope that there is some solid foundation to work around for the Boulders. Just may take a couple of weeks to get into the swing of things this season, but then we'll see what they can do. Moving on to the next coach. Next up with the number 7 pick, it's Chad and the Seattle Steamrollers with their first round pick, Kyurem, heading up the team, along with Tinglu, Slowking, Skarmory, Grimmsnarl, Weavile, Cinccino, Inteleon, and of course the stars of the show, Wooper, Charmeleon, and Hypno, with Kyurem heading up the Terra Captains alongside the Charmeleon and Hypno. Differently built team than we've seen from Chad, and overall so far, Steve, tell us about the stats and typings.
So the Seattle Steamrollers here do have multiple speed gaps. A gap from Cinccino's 115 down to Kyurem's 95, right in that sweet spot of speed. Could be a little bit of an issue, as well as a gap from Kyurem's 95 down to Charmeleon's 80, and a gap from Grimmsnarl 60 to Tinglu's 45, from Tinglu to Slowking's 30, and from that to Wooper's 15. I set my spec at 15, and he just went in gaps of 15 on those low speed tiers. Of course, that is pretty reasonable at that sub 60 speed, but I have to mention it. Overall range from 15 to 125, great coverage there, all sorts of options. Taking a look at the stats, they are top 3 in terms of HP, really helped out by the Kyurem and Tinglu, quite bulky pieces, but they're bottom 3 in terms of their defense, their special defense, and their special attack. This really comes from the low tier mons, bringing down the average. Looking at the typing, they have lots of issues. Bug with 4 weaknesses and only 2 resists. Fairy with 4 weaknesses and only 2 resists. Fighting with only 4 weaknesses and 2 resists. Flying is a little iffy with just a single resist, so it gets to have attack roll breakthrough. Grass 4 weaknesses and 3 resists. Ground with 1 and 1. Normal with just the 1 resist. And Rock with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. Overall, lots of types that can certainly be taken advantage of. Some of them, like Fairy, really good against the high tier mons, and with only Skarmory, really relied on for a lot of the defensive typing here. Once you get through the Skarmory, though, a lot of same weaknesses, and the rest of the team, it can easily fall apart. Michael, what do you think about the move pools here?
Yeah, so similarly, putting more kind of pressure on that Skarmory is it's really their only Tailwind user, which could be nice in getting some of those things like that Kyurem to be outspeeding some of the other faster threats. Their hazard game is pretty good. They've, of course, got Tinglu, fantastic at setting up hazards, as well as Skarmory. Removal, not so great. Tidy Up on Cinccino is their only form of removal, and that's not the most reliable one. It's not bad. I mean, it's a great move, and Cinccino I don't think is a bad Pokemon, but not really kind of going to be forming the kind of core of your defensive strategy and removing hazards there. Pivoting is okay, not as great from the Steamrollers as I would expect from them. I know they love their pivoting. They've got, of course, Chili Reception on the Slowking is fantastic. They've got Flip Turn on the Inteleon, U-Turn, Parting Shot. Good options, but not as many as I would expect to see them. Certainly not like we saw on the Wobbuffets. Not very diverse status options either. Lots of Thunderwave, not a whole lot else. Charmeleon being their only access to Will-O-Wisp. Toxic only coming from the Hypno and the Wooper. Great, but not great, but okay. Setup options, of course, the Kyurem is very scary if you want to go with the funny Loaded Dice Dragon Dance set. They've got some, stuff like some defensive setup, Iron Defense on like the Skarmory or something. Weavile could be running Swords Dance, but not a whole lot there. Probably not one of their fortes. Probably looking to break through with that Kyurem, most likely. What do you think here, Nate?
And that Kyurem, of course, is supplemented by Terra, something a little interesting. Gets it out of the ice typing, which could be a benefit to it under the Chili Reception, but otherwise kind of interesting there to give it more setup opportunities or let it stick around a little longer, along with Charmeleon and Hypno. Hypno, actually kind of a neat little tier 0 pickup there. I tried it out a little bit, but didn't end up getting to bring it. The team looks pretty one-note, I'm going to be honest here. Slowking into something like Kyurem, Slowking into Weavile, Grimmsnarl being able to pivot out into those things with screens, Tinglu being able to support the team with hazards along with Skarmory. If you play the Steamrollers, you pretty much know what the game plan is, I think. But there are, of course, still some pretty nice individual pieces here in the top there. I will see if maybe any of the Tier 0 mons can do anything, or if Chad will end up picking a throwaway game from them. Not sure what the plan is there yet. But relatively one note, I see potentially something like Fighting Electric coverage, just ripping through the team. Of course, this is the only team in the top 8 picks that I don't play. So thanks a lot. The Steamrollers may be able to make a couple transactions to help that out. I know there are a lot of mons here that they really like, so I'm not going to tell them to necessarily change that. But we do have to move on to our number 8 coach. And at number 8, we've got the Terrifier Heatwave coming back after their successful first season. They start off with Deoxys Speed, followed up by Landorus, Therian, Clefable, the early Bellybolt, Zarude, Dragalge, Kaparaja, Hariyama, Basculin Legion, Houndoom, and Dunsparce, with Deoxys Speed, Bellybolt being the Terra captains. A lot of mons that I personally love here, Steve, but talk to us about these stats and typings.
So it'll be a surprise to no one that there is a speed gap between Deoxys' speeds 180 and the follow-up of Zarude's 105. A little bit of a slower second mon there, but Deoxys speed, of course, carrying there. Also gap between Basculin Legion 78 and Clefable 60, once again, in those load speed tiers. Overall range from 30 to 180 with pretty good laddering elsewise. So fantastic range there. Taking a look at the stats there, top 3 in terms of their HP and in their attack. Some fantastic things there. Bottom 3 in terms of defense. No real defensive standouts. The best defensive mon here being Zarude at 105. So really just relying on average defense and offense, as well as Intimidate to help out there. Taking a look at their typing, Fairy could be a little bit of a problem with 2 weaknesses with a single resist coming from that Kaparaja. Ground also looks to be a little bit of an issue with 4 weaknesses and only 2 resists. Although in the case of Ground, the resists are some of the higher tier earlier pick mons like Landorus and Zarude. So that might be okay. Michael, what do you think about the move pool for this team?
Yeah, so you kind of talked about the gap, especially on that top end of speed, and the moves don't get better for them in that exact respect. No Tailwind setter, only Trick Room setter is the Deoxys speed, so really limited in kind of controlling the speed of the game. They do, however, have pretty great hazard setting between stuff like the Clefable, the Kaparaja, Dunsparce, I think is a little slept on, the Landorus, of course. However, once again, this is another team with absolutely no hazard removal options, which is definitely awkward. Pretty decent pivoting, not great, but pivot moves on a lot of different Pokemon. Great status spreading, though, I think. Clefable, of course, we know can spread stuff. Houndoom has Wisp and Toxic. Dragalge has Toxic. Dunsparce is fantastic at spreading status. Some pretty nice options there. Actually, not that much setup potential, though. Of course, you've got stuff like Clefable could be set up if you wanted to be offensive at some point. Deoxys Speed does get Nasty Plot, but doesn't have a huge special attack stat and isn't particularly bulky, so I'm not sure how well it would make use of that. Dunsparce could set up, and I think it'd be very interesting. Of course, Hariyama could. The Landers, of course, could do Sword Stance, Zarude could, but no really impressive setup options in my mind here. But they do certainly have stuff to work with in that regard. What do you think about the Terra options here, Nate?
Belly Bolt is one of my favorite Terra options for sure. A little bit slept on in the league. We saw put in a little bit of work in the low tier league, or the beginners league last season. Belly Bolt with the fourth round pick there, actually pretty well worth. And Deoxys Speed, pretty interesting there to give it a different look, potentially a little more coverage, a little more power on the offensive coverage option that already exists there. Could be really interesting to do, and potentially give it a free turn, a la something like Iron Valiant. Team overall is pretty solid. I think there are a couple of things that the team will be relying on that they really can't end up relying on. For example, as mentioned, the Copper Rush is the only, say, Dragon Resist, or not Dragon Resist, but the only Steel type there. It doesn't really function like a Steel, and will probably end up letting you down there in that regard. So some things like that could be a little bit of a problem. The off the bat, immediate offensive prowess as well. But there are a lot of really cool parts about the team. It's tough to spam one type into this team from what I can tell here. Clefable and Landorus really helping to contribute in that aspect, which is a pretty neat part of the team. Just enough pivoting, just enough power. I think the Heatwave are skilled enough coach to be able to maneuver around with some of these really cool pieces. Do not sleep on the Basque Legion there, even without rain. Pretty cool piece there. We're going to move on to the number 9 coach. And the number 9 team here picking in the draft, it's our very own Akron Agron. Shout out to Joey. Cancel him. Anyways, we got to pick up the Iron Bundle with the 9th overall pick, followed by Latias, Archaludon. There's the Pelipper. We're looking for some weather. Sandy Shocks, Moltres, Cryogonal, Hitmontop, Dockspun, Cacturn, and Gumshoes, with the Terra picks being Latias, Cryogonal, and Gumshoes. And pretty interesting picks there, Steve. What do you see with the stats and typing?
So we have our high speed tier gap once again between Iron Bundles 136 and Latias's 110. Although based on the mons and the speed tiers, that is probably okay. There's also a gap between Archaludon's 85 and Hitmontop 70. That could be a little more awkward against those mid-speed tier mons. Overall range of 45 to 136 is looking pretty good. Taking a look at the stats, they are top 3 overall in terms of their average special attack with tons of special hitters, and bottom 3 in terms of HP. Not a ton of HP on this team, with mons like Archaludon and Moltres' 90 being relied on for some of the bulk here. Taking a look at the typing, the team has multiple types that are pretty bad. Dragon and Fairy stand out. Dragon with a single resist in the dash bun while having 1 weakness, and Fairy will having 3 weaknesses with the single resist and Moltres. Other bad types include Fighting with 4 resist and 5 weaknesses, Ice with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. They have a single normal resist, and Rock can be a little awkward with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists. Michael, what do you think about the move pool?
Yeah, so I think one definite boon on the team here is they have 3 great Tailwind setters, and Latias, Pelipper, and Moltres all could be running Tailwind, all very reliable Pokemon. I think that's great to help them kind of push the speed advantage. They do have a ton of priority options. However, 8 of those priority top options come from Hitmontop, so actually, overall, their priority game is not that great. They don't have insane hazard setting. Archaludon, of course, has rocks, but then you've got stuff like the Cacturn and the Sandy Shocks, not really the most reliable hazard setters. The removal, though, is pretty good with the Hitmontop and the Cryogonal both having rapid spin, and of course we see that Terra on Cryogonal makes it a little easier to switch into some of those hazards if it doesn't have boots for some reason. 6 solid pivots here on the team gives them some really nice momentum. It's a little limited in their taunt usage, is a little unfortunate for them, but pretty solid elsewhere. Status is not great, but decent options. And then for setup as well, not a ton of different setup options, but they do still have stuff like the Latias, like the Archaludon, stuff like maybe even you could see a Cryogonal with that Terra after a rapid spin speed boost, getting up to some fun shenanigans. So we'll see how exactly that pans out for them. I do think they have really nice Terra captain selections here, though. What about you, Nate?
I definitely agree. I love Terra on Levitate Mons. Just give me an immunity to something, an easy way to get into Electric. Is a really nice wall tool there. Cryogonal, a little underrated in that wall aspect. And hey, there's a typing that is very tough to resist. And Latias giving it more options to set up. And hey, why not Gumshoes? You think this thing is actually pretty strong. This thing for our tier 0 may be a little bit of a bargain, but really looking at the team overall, it's going to be Iron Bundle plus Archaludon in Rain. You kind of know what's coming in that aspect, and for the rest of the team, I'm not sure it adds the most to help supplement that. It looks like Agron's kind of said, what are some individual holes that I really want to make sure I fill, and filled those, but I'm not sure that those are all encompassing. There's some nice mons down there in the second half of the draft. I'm not sure they really fill exactly what they need. So once again, you know what's coming. Plus, maybe Latias can be a little tricksy, but it's really tough to find answers to those things. I wonder how overwhelming something like Bundle plus our Chaladon Rain can be in draft. We may just find out here in one of the regular season champs of the league. We're going to move on to the second half of the draft here with number 10 coach. And we're kicking off the second half of the draft. Number 10 overall pick here, it's Summit County Psyducks, and their first selection was Roaring Moon, followed up by Volcarona, Hatterini, Torkoal, there's some more weather, Decidueye, Weezing, Magneton, Braviary, Hisuian, Goodra, Wigglytuff, and Scovillain, with that Roaring Moon and Scovillain as the Terra Captain choices. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
Yeah, so with this team, there are a lot of potential issues with speed. Roaring Moon at the top at 119 is pretty reasonable, but then you have a pretty big gap to Volcarona's 100. And then after Volcarona's 100, there's another gap down to Braviary's 80. From there, there's also gaps in the low tiers, a gap from Weezing and Goodra Hisui 60 down to Wigglytuff's 45, from Wigglytuff's 45 down to Hatterine's 29. Overall range of 20 to 119. And in general, one of the bottom three teams in terms of speed, just having, two of the Mons in the 20s, the 45 there with the Wigglytuff, and only having two Mons at or above 100 with the next fastest being 80 could be a little bit of a problem for this team. They are getting something, though, with the lack of speed, and that is special attack. Top three in terms of special attack. Taking a quick look at the typing, flying can be a little bit iffy that were for them with 3 weaknesses and only 2 resists coming from some of their later draft picks, as well as rock with 4 weaknesses and 2 resists, again, coming from later draft picks. The same 2, in fact, the 2 steel types. Michael, what do you think about the move pools?
Yeah, so touching on kind of what you said about the speed there, they do have 4 Tailwind setters, but I do expect Decidueye and Braviary to be shouldering that responsibility over Tailwind on Roaring Moon and Volcarona. I do think Trick Room on Hatterene is a viable pocket option, though, just for Hatterene, or perhaps an offensive Torkoal in that sun. For hazards, they're mostly limited to Stealth Rocks on the Torkoal, who can also spin, but the defog option on Decidueye and Braviary is nice to have, although I won't say they're the best defoggers in the league. For priority, unfortunately, though, Decidueye really is basically the only priority user, although it does have a nice Shadow Sneak as well as potential Grassy Glide, although I don't know where they're particularly getting the terrain from. Pivoting, they do have a handful of pivot moves being pretty solid and useful on things like Roaring Moon and Volcarona, although if those mons are more setup options, they're of course not going to get the most use out of it. For status options, they've got a nice variety of status options and setters kind of across the board. Then kind of talking about, I just mentioned it, the Volcarona and the Roaring Moon are of course very scary setup sweepers, but don't underestimate things like Hatterene or even Braviary to be able to set up and do big damage. What do you think about the team overall, Nate?
Yeah, the Terra Captains are very nice here. Roaring Moon, of course, outstanding. Be able to get stab on a variety of different moves. Be able to use Booster Energy very well. Dragon Dance very well as well. And Scoville, of course, appreciates having maybe a better defensive typing and other stab option there as well. When you look at the team, really, you look at the Sun, Torkoal right there, and several pretty good abusers there, but it's not so overwhelming that he has to be bringing the Sun every time. That said, it's a little tough to see where the speed is coming from, as was stated before. Trick Room on Hat, maybe some nice Choice Scarfers. We got a Chlorophyll on Scoville in there, and I guess some setup options too, but really it looks a little bit straightforward there and where the team is trying to attack and approach. I would love to see a little bit of creativity with team building here. That may be what it takes to be able to squeeze out some wins against some coaches that can see what's coming. But I do like a lot of the individual pieces here. Wonder how he's going to bring it together. See if we can make another nice playoff run this time around. Speaking of, we're going to move on to the number 11 pick. And with the number 11 pick, it's the Wooper Boopers coming back into the league, and this time selecting Sneasler with their first-round pick, followed up with Enamorous, Baxcalibur, Jirachi, Incineroar, Serena, Tatsugiri, Mudsdale, Sableye, Zebstrika, and Charizard, with, once again, the first and last picks being the Terra Captains here, Sneasler and Charizard. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
Yeah, the stats for this team are actually looking very impressive. The only speed gap along their entire range is from Sableye's 50 to Mudsdale's 35. But at that point, you're not particularly worried about the speed laddering, so an overall range of 35 to 120 is fantastic. Taking a look at the stats, the team is top 3 in terms of average attack. notably with their first 6 draft picks, as well as 2 of the later ones, all having 100 or higher base attack. Tons of physical offense on this team. Typing does have a couple of concerns. Fairy could be a little bit concerning with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. Ground with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists. Rock with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists. As well as Ghost, a potential concern with just that 1 resist and Incineroar and 1 weakness. So a couple of exploitable types, but overall a fantastic looking team. Michael, what do the stats say? The moves say?
Yeah, so for speed control, they do have that nice, speed lettering, like you said. But for speed control, their only tailwind setter is Enamorous, of course, not being particularly bulky and probably wanting to be more offensive anyways. They do have a Trick Room on the Jirachi, but I'm not really seeing a big payoff for that on the team. For hazards, Jirachi and Mudsdale are going to be their nice, reliable rockers, with Rapid Spin on Serena and Tatsugiri, not the best, but far from the worst in the league. Priority, they are lacking, though, aside from Excalibur's Ice Shard, of course, being quite strong. For pivoting, though, that is looking better. They've got 5 solid mons with pivot moves, some offensive pieces like the Sneasler, some nice defensive pieces like the Incineroar, the Serena, does give them some momentum on the team. Status, again, not particularly varied, but they do have some nice, reliable options. Of course, stuff like Jirachi, Incineroar, Sableye, definitely fine at getting out these status options. For setup, the Excalibur and the Sneasler are, of course, the standouts, but don't at all forget about Contrary and Enamorous, definitely able to bring the pain. Nate, what do you think about this team? I'm definitely interested in what you think about their choice of Terra Captain.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of very nice options here up at the top, similar to last time with Zach. It would have been nice to see the Volcarona there. In this case, man, Enamorous is such a nice Terra Captain, too. That just happens to go by the wayside here. Stellar Terra Blast is so spammable, would have been very nice. But I am still a big fan of Sneasler getting the Terra Captain there as well. Get a little bit more power and some moves, stab on some other options. Give it an opportunity to Sword Stance up if you can find a way to get that on Burden Boost. This thing could kind of win on its own as well. Maybe Enamorous has a little more utility that it doesn't need to rely on Terra as much. And Charizard is a really cool option. I know the Boopers have played around with Manuel Sun in the very recent past as well, so Charizard, a cool option there too. For the team overall, I really like the first about 4 picks or so there. Wow, those are really, really strong, powerful candidates there. And I think the supporting cast is pretty solid. I really like some of the picks in the mid-rounds there, the Serena, the Mudsdale and such. Could potentially mix and match a little bit with those later picks. But hey, if it's a comfort thing, if Tatsugiri is providing what you want, if Sableye is providing what you want, and that's what you're comfortable with, hey, that could really work pretty well for you. And the core is so solid. I really like the Boopers' chance to repeat in the playoffs with such a strongly built team and with a little bit of versatility potentially. Move around that Terra candidacy as well. But we're going to move on to the number 12 team. And with the number 12 pick, well, would you look at that? It's my very own Buffalo Boufflant, the defending champions. First picking Latios there in that first round, followed up by Iron Hands, Empoleon, Weezing Galar, Mismagius, Cinderace, Bisharp, Gligar, Yanmega, Cloth, and Komala. A little bit of a different approach to the Terra Captains with Mismagius, Bisharp, and Yanmega grabbing those slots. Steve, talk to me about my stats and typings.
Yeah, taking a look at the team, I have very few lines on this team. Solid speed tiering all the way out from 50 at the bottom to Cinderace at the top with 119. Only real comment I could make there is that, the highs and lows aren't quite as high as low as other teams, but really hitting all those key areas and having fantastic tiering throughout. Taking a look at the base stats, overall top 3 in terms of average attack and defense. Lots of big hitters, and especially on the physical side there, really helping out, making this team quite physically strong. Taking a look at the typing, things are generally pretty well covered. The only thing that is a little bit sketchy is the water, where there are 3 weaknesses. However, they're all coming from typically lower tiers or the Cinderace, as well as 2 resist coming from those early picks. So overall, fantastic on most regards, and, great team, Nate. Michael, what about the move pool?
Yeah, move pool also looking pretty good. You've got 3 solid Tailwind setters. You do have access to Trick Room for maybe a sneaky Iron Hands sweep 1 week. Your hazards are incredible, though. Several options, but definitely expecting Gligar and Empoleon to shoulder that role for you mostly this season. For removal, you do have Defog on the Weezing, then Court Change and Rapid Spin from the Cinderace and Komala. I think there are a couple awkward Pokemon to kind of use that role, but I definitely have faith in your coach to use those options no problem. Priority is one area where you are lacking a bit. You've got mostly Sucker Punch from a lot of sources. You have some other options, but nothing particularly powerful, I would say. For pivoting, you do have an excellent pivot core. Those 7 excellent pivot mons with the offensive and defensive pieces all having pivot moves. I think that's going to be really great, allowing you to keep up momentum in most of your matches. Status, also great status play. You've got lots of good options for multiple statuses, especially 2 great Toxic users. Toxic definitely being harder to come by than it has been in past gens. Having 2 nice Toxic users is great. And of course, for your setup options, Latios, Iron Hands, Mismagius, Cinderace, Bisharp, lots of scary options, and do not count Cloth out. I definitely expect you to try to pull off something with a Cloth 1 week. So, kind of, are you happy with your team? What do you think?
I think so. Again, I mentioned before the Terra Captain's maybe a little bit odd here. I have the lowest high Terra Captain here at only 7 points with Bisharp, Yanmega, and Mismagius. I think they can all take advantage in very different ways. Yanmega loves having a little bit extra coverage, maybe getting out of that typing as well to maybe live 1 hit. Mismagius, of course, a great abuser with Levitate, and as you mentioned, the ability to Nasty Plot up. Bisharp, the typing is, of course, pretty nice since my only Ghost Resist, but also could potentially power up dark moves or get into something else there too. Wonder if Iron Hands or Latios may be able to sneak in there as well as potential Terror Captains. Overall, I really like a lot of these Mons on the team. Obviously, the numbers say they all fit together well, but it still kind of feels a little eclectic. I think it will take a little bit of work for me to try and get everything to mesh together properly and work well, and it may even take a couple of weeks, but I really like a lot of the individual Mons on here. A lot of stuff I'm really excited to use. And obviously, we've had some track record of success in the recent past, so maybe it will all come together as we're all hoping it will. I know you're hoping it will. Let's move on to number 13, coach. And with the number 13 pick, it's another new coming coach here, Anivia, with VGC experience coming in and snacking up that Goldengo. Very powerful pick to start off with, followed up by Dragonite, Samurott Hisui, great pick to go with Goldengo, Slowking Galar, Breloom, Rotom Heat, Rabombi, Sandaconda, Dragonair, Gloom, and Cottonee. Got the double core there in Terrace with Dragonite and Dragonair, plus the Gloom. No, don't be sleeping on that Gloom pick, already. Steve talked to us about the stats and typings.
Yeah, so this team has a little bit of a interesting speed situation here. Fastest Mon, Rabombi's 124. Speed gap down to the next fastest, Rotom Heat at 86. A massive gap, and really just doesn't have speeds above 86 outside of that Rabombi, so could be a little bit concerned. There is also a speed gap between Cottonee's 66 and Gloom's 40. Overall range from 30 to 124. Range is pretty good, but as mentioned, they're really just concentrated from 30 to 86, and this team will find itself frequently outsped. Looking at the stats, they are bottom 3 in terms of the average HP and attack. Some of this probably due to some of the lower tier picks they were forced to land with some of their higher tier stuff. HP overall, nothing too spectacular, but certainly they're able to make it out. Taking a look at the typing, there are some things that could be an issue. Normal, they just have the single immunity and Goldengo, so a powerful normal type of user might be able to break through them. Ice is pretty bad with 6 weaknesses and 3 resists, although many of the weaknesses are from the low tier picks at the end. Ghost with 2 weaknesses and 1 resist. Flying with 4 weaknesses and 2 resist. And Fire with lots of effectiveness here, 5 weaknesses and 4 resists. So overall, some types that might be more exploitable than others, but reasonably spread. Michael, what about the move pool?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned that speed, and they do have an excellent Trick Room setter in that Galarian Slowking, but no real great Trick Room payoff, unfortunately. They do have 2 Tailwind setters, which could help, but they're on awkward Mons, the Rabombi and the Dragonite. Again, Mons that don't necessarily want to be taking the time to be setting up Tailwind. Sticky Webs from that Rabombi could definitely be helping with those speeds, though. For hazards, they only have 1 source of each hazard, so I think Ceaseless Edge on that Samurott definitely going to be carrying a lot of weight for hazard stacking this season. And they do have absolutely no removal on this team, which is very unfortunate. They don't have a huge play in that game, so it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how they stack up with their setting, and of course no removing. Maybe they can pick up a piece of removal somewhere along during the season. Priority, not a lot, but they do have strong options from that Dragonite with the extreme speed, Samurott of course, and that Breloom. For their pivoting, they don't have a lot of options, but God, Chilly Reception on Slowking is so good. Just switch into that and then Chilly Reception out into whatever you want. For statuses, they actually have some pretty amazing status spreading with multiple good sources of every status, except actually relatively low access to burn. For setup threats, of course, we've got that Dragon Knight, the Goldango, the Samurott, the Breloom, but don't count out Sandaconda, Rabambi, or Slowking even potentially having some fun offensive sets and putting in some work during the season. What do you think about the team, Nate?
Yeah, this is pretty solid, especially up there at the top. Really interested to see what's going to happen with the Terra users. Dragonite is obvious. If it were up to me, probably would be banned, but I at least got it up to the top tier there. But it's very interesting to see when Dragonair is going to come with its Terra option. When you already have Dragonite that could do that too, I suppose if you can bring Dragonite in a different capacity, you could still have Dragonair do about the same thing on a budget, or you could have one break for the other, which could be pretty neat. And Gloom actually pretty tanky. Wonder what is going to go on with that one down there. Overall, I wonder if those bottom three mons are going to drag the team down, but overall, I don't know. That the top looks really, really solid for sure. That speed gap really does concern me, though. I don't know how much you can rely on Sticky Web to slow things down, and it looks very, I don't know, standard, I suppose, for OU, which is good in a way, but also means that you do need to be creative enough to break away from those standard trends that you're going to see all over the OU ladder. If you're a little too predictable, not sure that the mons themselves have enough to be able to get you out of situations, however good they are. But if you can see it coming, there are some shortcomings that I think are pretty clear and clean. Newcomer draft, if you can adapt quickly, you could have some pretty instant success with this squad. Let's move along to the next coach. And with number 14 pick, we're moving on to Hitmon John, coach of the Close Combat Club. And he's picking up Tornadus Therian with his first rounder, followed by Iron Treads, Annihilate, Alomomola, Brute Bonnet, Toracat, Hoopa, Enamorous T, Colossal, Meowstick, and Skuntank, with the Terra Captains being Annihilate and Colossal. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
Yeah, so taking a look here at the speed, there are a couple of speed gaps at the top and bottom from Tornadus Therian's 121 down to Iron Tread's 106, as well from Enamorous Therian's 46 down to Colossal's 30. Not so worried about the bottom gap. The top gap could be a little bit of a concern, but overall fine. Great speed ranges from 30 to 121. Taking a look at the base stats, this team is top 3 in terms of HP, really being carried by mons like Alomomola and 4 other mons above base 100. So tons of HP to go around for the team. Taking a look at typing, there are a couple types that have me a little concerned. Electric with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. Ghost with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. Ground with 4 weaknesses and 3 resists. Rock, of course, as always, being a highlight with 4 weaknesses and 2 resists, although 2 of those resists are Iron Treads and Annihilate, so probably not as bad as it sounds. And Water with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. Michael, what about the move pools?
Yeah, so starting off with the speed control, they do have Trick Room and Tailwind options on this team, giving them a variety of options. For hazards, they have excellent rock setting with possible spikes and toxic spikes as well. Of course, they have Iron Treads being one of the best spinners in the league, or Pokemon in general right now. Of course, with Colossal as a backup spinner potentially, I could see it getting some use as such. For priority, they're definitely mostly relying on Sucker Punch, which is a little unfortunate for them. For pivoting, though, they do have pivoting moves on both of their Regenerator mons, which is absolutely crazy, with pivoting, of course, on Iron Treads and Annihilate as well, giving them a little more momentum. But geez, those Regenerator mons with pivot moves, absolutely terrifying. For status, they do have solid access to all statuses. Of course, access to Prankster T-Wave is, of course, a nice bonus as well. For setup, Annihilate is definitely the big one, but Hoopa, Enamorous, Tornadus, and even maybe Colossal again could be some big boosting threats in some matches. What do you think here, Nate?
Yeah, this is a pretty well-constructed team. Love the Terra Captains here as well. Annihilate, of course, a crucial rock resist, but also would love to be able to Terra into another typing to boost up that Rage Fist. You already know what some of those sets can do. And Colossal, also something that would love to get out of that typing and suddenly become a monstrous wall if you give it something like a Fairy timing, or even something to help resist rock as well to help out the team there too. Hoopa would have been a pretty nice candidate as well. Another team where I really love those top picks a lot. It feels like there's a ton of synergy between those first 3 or 4 picks as well. Maybe a couple moves in the lower tiers there. I see that Torracat was prioritized a little bit, and then you picked up Colossal, which just kind of is a little bit better at doing just about everything that that's looking to do. Love some of the breakers that were picked up later as well. Brute Bonnet is an interesting little ghost resist. Plus, you already know John cannot resist the Spore user there too. This looks like a really solid team. I wonder if John has the time this season to be able to put in the effort and energy unlike in the last season or two. And if so, I really like the squad that he's got going here. This could be an under-the-radar team. But we've got to move on to our next pick. And with the 15th pick, We're back to Tony DJ with the mighty Miltanks. Always love using that cursed image in the upper left there. But their first round pick was Garchomp, followed by the Zapdos, Galar, Manaphy, Gliscor, Arcanine, Hisui, Raichu, Alola, Victory Bell, Ditto, Voltorb, Hisui, Lapras, and Spiritomb, with the Terra Captains being Garchomp, Victory Bell, and the Hisui and Voltorb. Steve talked to us about the stats and typings.
So, starting off, as I always do, with the speed tiers, there is a gap between Arcanine Hisui's 90 and Victory Bell's 70. A little bit of a concern, but overall a reasonable range from 35 to 110. Of course, 110 being the top speed is a little bit of a concern. Generally, we'd like to see something a little bit higher than that for the top tier. Taking a look at the base stats, they are generally average across the board, even with some of these lower tier mons in here. Their higher tier mons are making up for it, and there's no stats that they are particularly above or behind in. However, the same cannot be said for the typing. Looking, first of all, at Dragon, where they have one weakness and no resist, Dragon spam against this team is going to be very easy to do. Of course, Terra can help with that, but something to keep your eye on. Additionally, they have multiple types with a single resist. Rock that has two weaknesses and the one resist. Dark with one weakness and one resist. Ghost with one weakness and one resist. Lots of spammable types there, as well as some that are, a little on the more iffy side with Fairy, 3 weaknesses and 2 resists. Ground, 3 weaknesses, 2 immunities. And Ice with 4 weaknesses, 3 resist. Ice especially having some of those top tier mons weak and quad weak to Ice. So something that the Miltanks are really going to have to look out for. Michael, what about the move pools?
Yeah, so for speed control, they do have Tailwind on Zapdos and Trick Room on Spiritomb, but I do believe that Tailwind on Gliscor would be the majority of their speed setting options there. For Hazards, of course, Garchomp and Gliscor can both pile on the rocks and the spikes. However, this is another team that has absolutely no removal. I'm absolutely shocked at the number of teams we've seen this season that have not drafted any removal. Going to priority, Extreme Speed is definitely their best option from that Arcanine, but Shadow Sneak and Ice Shard do give them a couple of different options that they could bring if they happen to bring the Spiritomb and the Lapras. For pivoting, they've got nice fast pivots in the Zapdos and the Raichu, with some bulky pivots in Manaphy and Gliscor as well being nice. Status? It's actually quite nice here. They've got multiple sources of every status, and definitely I think especially like the Spiritomb having access to Wisp, Hypnosis, and Thunderwave could be really annoying to deal with in some matches. For setup, of course, Garchomp, Zapdos, Manaphy, Raichu are definitely the main ones to watch out for, but I do think Gliscor and Victory Bell could surprise you if they manage to get off something like a Swords Dance, or even he runs like Manual Sun for that Chlorophyll Victory Bell with the growth option. What do you think, Nate?
These are some really interesting options around here. For Terra, the Garchomp would absolutely love to get a little bit extra power or get another free turn to set something up. Swords Dance, Scale Shot, ooh, already kind of nasty there. Victory Bell, underrated potentially, I think, as a Terra candidate. A lot of these weather abusers would love to be able to get a different Terra typing to be able to function outside of the weather or better abuse the weather as well. And Voltorb, hey man, why not? It's very fast actually, and kind of could be a neat little pivot there for 0 points. The team overall, I kind of see a bit of sameness here. Those first 5 mons all right around the same speed tier. All of them are very powerful in and of themselves right away. A lot of them have pivoting. There's a lot of sameness there, but honestly, it's in such a way that without needing to invest too much, these are all very scary mons. And actually, with all of them being around that same area, it would take a little bit of setup to be able to get over them. That's where something like Ditto actually fits in really solidly on this team. I actually like quite a bit of the construction of this team. You can find the right places to be able to bring the right mons in, click the right moves. I think there could actually be a path here for the Miltanks to get back into contention here, just like they were last season. But we're going to have to move on to a team that's been in a similar position to them in the recent history. And with number 16 pick, welcome back to Michael of the Kanto Kinglers and their first round selection of Iron Boulder. And that will be joined by Rillaboom, Corviknight, Toxapex, who let them get those two back-to-back, Rotom, Wash, Hoopa Unbound, Ursaluna, Pullen, and me from last season, and then Vulpix, Mareep, Flaffy, and Sunkern. We're all going to be rooting for this team with those bottom mons, especially with Hoopa Unbound as a Terra Captain, being joined by Sunkern as the other option there. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
Yeah, so the speeds definitely leave a little bit to be desired. Starting at the top with Iron Boulder's 124, there is a speed gap to Rotom Wash's 86. Wait a second, haven't I seen that before? It is crazy that there are 2 teams that have a 124 speed dropping to a Rotom at 86. However, they also have a second speed gap from Vulpix's 65 down to Ursaluna's 50. An overall range from 30 to 124. decent range, but as mentioned, with that huge gap in the speed tier with only one mon faster than 86, there is definitely a concern for speed. Taking a look at stats, they are bottom 3 in terms of average HP, attack, defense, special attack, and speed. And, I don't want to point any fingers, but Sunkern may be bringing down the average on all of these quite substantially. And the Mareep, Flaffy, and Vulpix certainly aren't helping. This is just, of course, the average stats. They certainly have mons that can accomplish all of those things, but it is all in their first 7 picks, which they will be really relying on for most of the season. Taking a look at the typing, they do have a lot of things that could be a concern. First of all, Dark is pretty bad with a single weakness and no resist. So that is something definitely look out for. In a similar vein, Dragon could be pretty iffy with a single resist and nothing else. Dragon spam looking good. And many other types with a similar boat. Fighting with 1 weakness and 1 resist, Ghost with 1 weakness and 1 resist, Rock with 1 weakness and 1 resist, as well as some types where they have lots of interactions, Bug with 4 weaknesses and 3 resist, and Ground with 5 weaknesses and 4 resists. So plenty of places for coaches to try and find a good matchup, but it'll certainly just depend on what your team does best, and that probably will be okay against the Kinglers. Michael, what about the move pools?
Yeah, so they do have that nice and reliable tailwind on Corviknight to help with potentially some of those speeds. They do also have Trick Room on Hoopa, who may not really want to set it, but, an Ursaluna in Trick Room is certainly scary. For hazards, they do, again, have nice and reliable defog coming from that Corviknight. However, their only real hazard is Toxic Spikes from Toxapex. No real other hazard play to be mentioned on this team. Priority similarly sparse with really only the Grassy Glide coming from Rillaboom. Pivoting, kind of a similar story. Basically only U-turn on Rillaboom and Corviknight. Of course, you've got stuff like the Volt Switch on some of the lower tiers, but really, if we're talking about serious pivoting, it's basically limited to Rillaboom and Corviknight. For statuses, pretty much only Toxic on Toxapex again. Setup options are at least looking a little better with Iron Boulder, Rillaboom, Corviknight, Ursaluna, Hoopa, all being potential setup options. However, they do heavily lean physical setup, with really the Hoopa Unbound the only thing that could set up specially. So while they do have some more options of the moves than I just mentioned, a lot of them are limited to those lower mons, so I'm not sure how much you can really count on them. What do you think, Nate?
This is a strangely constructed team, isn't it? The Hoopa Unbound is kind of an interesting Terra candidate here. It still will suffer from its low HP in defense and middling speed, but hey, another turn would not be wouldn't be very much be appreciated there. And the Sunkern, I'm not really sure what's going on with it, but hey, I am really excited to see what he's going to bring out with Sunkern. But the team overall, this is probably the one I'm most concerned about. There are a lot of interesting mons here, but coming together, I don't see all that much happening. It feels like there are going to be a lot of teams with mons with 1 or 2 moves that are just very spammable into this team. What happens if, say, Corviknight goes down and then there's a big weakness there? What happens if just Toxapex is broken and everything else is exposed there? I do see a lot of reason for concern for the team, as mentioned, with things like pivoting, lack of speed control, lack of hazard control, etc. There should be no 6-0 games, I think, against this team, but it's really tough to see them winning too many games here with the mons that are presented. But hey, there are some walls here that are just that difficult to break. Something like Iron Boulder could win on its own, get something set up, and who knows, but you can make some magic happen for sure. We're going to move on to our next coach.
Go ahead, Nate.
And coming up towards the end, the 17th pick overall, it's Matt of the Cincinnati Incineroar in their first round pick of Ogrepon Hearthflame, followed up with Darkrai, Walking Wake, Deoxys Defense, Diancie, Tentacruel, Tropius, Excadrill Hippopotas, Sudowoodo, and Cramorant, with the Ogrepon, Tropius, and Cramorant being the Terra captains for the team. Steve, talk to us about the stats and typings.
Yeah, this team does have a couple of barely speed gaps between Darkrai's 125 and Ogrepon Hearthflame's 110. Cramorant's 85 down to Tropius 51, and Deancie's 50 down to Hippopotas's 32. An overall range of 30 to 125, pretty reasonable. A couple of gaps, especially behind Cramorant, and that like 70s is missing. So, opponents will be able to save some EVs there, but that's fine. Looking at their base stats, they are top 3 in terms of their average defense and special defense, not at all related to the Deoxys defense and Diancie picked in the 4th and 5th round. Taking a look at the typings, there are a couple of types that have concern. Ghost is a little iffy with 1 weakness and 1 resist. Ice is pretty bad with 2 weaknesses and a single resist. However, most of that is all in low tiers. Grass with 3 weaknesses and 2 resists, rock with 4 weaknesses and 2 resists, ground with 4 weaknesses and 2 immunities. However, most of these types, their concerns tend to come from the later picks. So overall, a pretty well-balanced type chart and stats. Michael, what about the move pools?
Yeah, so they do have Tailwind on 2 of their lower tier mons, the Tropius and the Cramorant. Not the most reliable, but we do have that Terra on the Tropius to maybe let it get that off a bit more consistently. They do, however, have 2 excellent Trick Room setters in the Diancie and the Deoxys defense, although I would maybe like to see them pick up a more substantial Trick Room payoff to go with those excellent setters. For hazards, they have lots of options on this team, but definitely looking at Diancie and the Deoxys defense throwing out them the most this season. For priority options, they are pretty limited. They do have stuff like Aqua Jet on the Walking Wake. They have stuff like Sucker Punch on Darkrai, Extreme Speed on Deoxys, but none of them are particularly strong options. For pivoting, they do have a couple Flip Turn and U-Turn users, but the Teleport on Deoxys defense is definitely, I think, the nice part of the pivoting on their squad here. That nice slow pivot on such a bulky mon is great. For status, they are a little bit lacking, really just Darkrai, Tentacruel, and Deoxys being status spreaders and not very varied in their ability to spread that status. For weather, though, they do have good access to both Sandstorm and Sunny Day, looking at the potential payoffs for both weathers on the team here. Of course, they have that Sandstorm on Hippopotas as well. For setup, Ogerpon, definitely the scariest option here, but Darkrai, Diancie, Excadrill, and Walking Wake, maybe even Deoxys Defense 1 week, could also be scary options here. Nate, what do you think of the team? I think there's a lot of different ideas going on here.
Yeah, these are some pretty interesting options. You're not sure how well they play together, but that Ogerpon really doesn't need any team support to be able to function very, very effectively. And while as a Terra captain, there is a reason it got banned from OU, not the least of which is its ability to go Terra Fire and go off, winning games on its own. Trophy is pretty interesting, as you already touched on, potentially help it get set up a little bit, maybe even abuse Harvest a bit. And Cramorant, hey, why not just abuse the water moves that are pretty spammable already against most teams anyways? Overall, I've mentioned this with a few teams that there are a lot of teams that just don't have mons that function or fit together all that well. But I think the difference between those and this team, the Incineroar A have some pretty nice pivoting options. I see some flip turn and some teleport options around here, but also those mons that kind of function by themselves, I think are very good win conditions. Something like Deoxys Defense can set up and just kind of win. Darkrai can set up and win. And of course, Ogerpon can set up and win. And the little bit that you do have there, potentially some nice breakers there. Walking Wake and Excadrill could be used pretty effectively there. Would have been nice to try and get Vulpix, but hey, it was a pretty funny snipe from the Kinglers already anyways, but that would really help to round out the team quite effectively here. Really good pieces. Wonder how Matt's going to put them together, but I think he's also at his best when he's working on his own game plan, and this team should help you to do that. So we're going to move on to the final pick of the draft. And with the 18th and last pick in the draft, it's Jimmy and the Newport Noctels. Historically very successful in the league. Let's see what happens whenever we give them the wheel pick here at the end. And they will do it by immediately abusing the Regieleki with their first round pick, followed by Greninja, Salamence, Tinkaton, Donphan, Ogerpon, Torigiraf, Chandelure, Quillfish, Furret, and Phalanx, with the Terra options being Regieleki and Farigiraf. Maybe we made a mistake there with Eleki. We'll talk about that later. Steve talked to us about the stats and typings.
So yeah, taking a look at these speed tiers, we got a pretty big gap right off the back from Regieleki's 200 down to Greninja's 122. Really got to fix that up. It's expected. It's fine. There's also a gap between Phalanx's 75 and Farigiraf's 60. An overall range of 50 to 200. Excellent here, having 2 mons above 110 with both the Greninja and the Regieleki, and then Ogerpon right at 110. Fantastic speed, looking great there. Taking a look at the base stats, they are, of course, top 3 in terms of their speed with all of the threats I mentioned. However, they are bottom 3 in terms of special defense, with only Tinkaton going above a base 100, so could be a little weak on the special side. Taking a look at the typing, ground does stand out as a pretty big weakness with 4 weaknesses and 2 resists. Those 2 resists being some key members of their team, but definitely something we're going to have to keep our eyes on. Additionally, Dragon could be a little bit concerned with only Tinkaton there as an immunity. Otherwise, the mons being weak or resistant to Dragon could be a little bit of an issue. Michael, what about the move pools?
Yeah, so Salamence is their only Tailwind setter, which is a little unfortunate. They do have 2 Trick Room users, but not a particularly great payoff for that. For hazards, they do have reliable rocks and several spikes options coming from a variety of mons, as well as 2 good rapid spinners, and of course that low tier tidy up from the Ferret to boot. For priority, you're mostly going to be scared of priority from the Greninja with stuff like the Water Shuriken. Phalanx, First Impression, and Donphan Ice Shard are useful though, as well as some maybe niche priority from some other Pokemon. For pivoting, I love the offensive pivots and stuff like the Alecki, the Greninja, and the Ogerpon, as well as Quillfish flip turning, and maybe even Fergaraf using Baton Pass as a pivot move could be something we could see. For status, lots of Thunder Wave access, but actually pretty limited otherwise is a little unfortunate for them. Of course, though, back with the setup, they're absolutely terrifying. Of course, Greninja, Salamence, Ogerpon, and even Fergaraf could be ones to watch out for. And of course, I'd love to see Phalanx potentially put in some no-retreat work at some point during the season. What do you think here, Nate?
Yeah, what can I say? Jimmy drafts so darn well. It's going to start with that Regieleki up at the top there. You already know this was picked for Terra abuse, something we had talked about potentially banning, but we ended up just charging the Terra candidacy much higher than the actual cost of Alecki. We'll see if maybe that was a functional mistake on our end, but that's going to be obviously a fantastic abuser for him. And for a draft, something that he's very familiar with as well, and using that effectively as a lower tier, very bulky option. I think, as you said previously, it comes down to amazing offensive pivoting there. Love the Greninja and the Regieleki and the Ogerpon all working together well. Those walls that Jimmy's very familiar with, the Tinkatoni's used before, Donphan, or I think a steal at tier 5 there at the end of the 5th round. Salamence, excellent. Even those lower tier picks, and the Phalanx for 2 points actually looks really nice. A classic Jimmy team, something that he's going to use incredibly well, and I expect to see him near the top of the standings when all is said and done. And with that, we've gone through every team in the draft. There's really only one thing left to do, and that's to look forward. We've got some week 1 matchups to preview. And here we have a look at the week 1 matchups. Definitely not late at all. Steve, as the schedule maker, this week is full of absolute bangers of matches. A lot of matches between teams that are right next to each other in your initial power rankings. If you had to limit it down to maybe just a couple to watch for, what are we looking at?
Well, if you're asking me for a couple, I'm going to definitely have to highlight these top 2 games. The Buffalon as a perennial 1 seed, but do tend to lose to the Burbs, a big week 1 matchup, as well as the 2 and 3 Noctowls and Wobbuffets. The Wobbuffets having knocked the Noctowls out of playoff contention the past 2 seasons in the semifinals. Will the Noctowls get their revenge? Some really big games right off the bat. Michael, what other games stick out to you?
Yeah, so, I mean, we can just keep going down the list. I mean, we've got the Agrons and the Incineroar. Again, teams that are definitely perennially in that kind of playoff position. Don't always make the deepest runs, but always definitely coaches to watch out for. Interested to see what's going on there. But I will then bounce around the list. I'm going to head down to the bottom. We've got the Chillin' Chi-Yus up against the Chicago Clods. New coaches to the league. Would love to see what they're all about and how they play against each other. Definitely interesting to see just the new talent coming to the league. What about you, Nate?
Yeah, there are just so many to pick from here. Okay, I guess I'll go to Calgary and the Terrifier Heatwave. Both first round exits this last time, but very good showings in the regular season. Maybe the 2 best regular season teams. Both of them looking to bounce back a little bit there. And on the other end, right below them, the Steamrollers and Clobbers, a couple teams that have gone a little bit downhill the last season or 2 here. Clobbers missing the playoffs after really strong showing the previous season, and Steamrollers going downhill fast after the last couple seasons. Wonder which one of them can right the ship. And of course, the Club and Boopers. I mean, those matches are always really interesting and fun whenever those happen. Man, there are so many good matches here in week 1. Guess you're just going to have to come right back here to this channel to check out a recap of week 1 matches. Thank you so much for sitting through the entirety of the draft recap. Hope you learned something interesting. Thank you as always to my co-hosts, Steve and Michael, for going through this with me as well. Comment down below something that you learned about the draft or your favorite draft. Let us know that you made it all the way through the draft as well. Otherwise, we're going to see you back here for the week 1 recap and for the match of the week, as we do every single week. We'll see you there.